Hello, everyone. This is Stacy. Welcome to the landing. Hello, and welcome back to the landing. I am very excited about the guest that we have with us today. This is a first for us at the landing. We have more than one at a time, so I'm excited to hear this conversation and to get the dialogue going. Today we have Miss Dawn Merrill Simpson and her daughter Sarah, and also Miss Charlotte Johnson. And we're going to be talking about the Down East Middle School. But before we get into that, I want them to tell us a little bit about who they are, where they're from, who their crowd is, all of that. So if you will introduce yourselves, and I guess we'll start with you, Dawn.
I'm Dawn Merrill Simpson, and my parents were from this area. My mom actually went to Smyrna when it was probably in the 40s, and probably when it was maybe even up to maybe only 10th grade at that time. And my father was from Beaufort, so we've been living in the area this entire time. And as far as work, I've started working in Havelock, but ended up in Carteret County back at home, and took a little time off, but have been back at the library at Smyrna and Down East Middle since 2011.
Okay. All right. And you, Miss Sarah?
Sarah Simpson, I'm 22, so I just graduated college, but I grew up in Betty, North Carolina, so I've lived here my whole life. I went to Smyrna from kindergarten to 8th grade, then I went to East Carteret, so had the pleasure of living down here my whole life, and it's been great.
All right, Miss Charlotte?
My name is Charlotte Johnson. Currently, I am the middle school science teacher, one of them, 6 and 8. And I'm originally from Wake Forest, North Carolina. My father and his side of the family moved here when I was around 12, and after college, I moved here full time in 2008. So I have lived in Beaufort, and then my father has lived in Betty. But I've taught only at Down East Middle and at Atlantic Elementary.
Okay. Thank you all for being here and for agreeing to talk with us a little about Down East Middle School, because this is something that was not around when I was coming up. I went to Harkers Island Elementary, kindergarten through 8th, and then I went to East Carteret. So this was, when it was happening, it was very interesting to me, as it was a lot of folks down east, like, how is this going to be, and what is it all about? And it opened in 2015. So it's been around a little while now, and we've seen some great success. So we're going to start the conversation a little with a little bit of the backstory. And so, Dawn, you were involved in the creation, the idea, the work, the challenges of making this a reality. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about that, what you remember, and just highlight that process.
It was a long endeavor, I think, to help all 3 feeder schools have greater success at the high school. Having that large group transition was one of the main goals. I think that has been a great success for that. One of the things I know with challenges of all the backstory of getting that done was, what was it going to look like? You have some of the down to the nitty gritty of finding a mascot of a new school. So all of those pieces, the lookouts. So we have a lighthouse. And so you were trying to, blend, you have Pirates and Islanders and Blue Devils, and you were trying to, I think it was a great choice. And so those things, all those little pieces of developing a brand new entity were in place. Staff members and all of those details, and taking our elementary school became a little bit smaller to make that happen, and for our middle school to grow. So that was one of the greatest as far as the beginnings of how to make that happen.
Wow. Do you remember when you first heard that this was going to be done? This idea was coming, because how was it received? Because I remember I was living away at the time, and so I would hear things, and it would be a blend. And I'm not going to tell exactly what I heard. I want to hear what y'all think. But how was it received in the Down East communities?
I think change is hard. A lot of controversy whenever there's change mentioned. I think the more transparent the details were, I think was better. Yeah. So I, as a staff member, as a parent, I didn't have the angst from Smyrna's side, but I know feeder schools, that was a bigger transition for them than our Smyrna. Charlotte, do you want to speak to some of the Atlantic
Charlotte,
thoughts?
You were
because
in Atlantic.
You were at Atlantic at the time, so feelings there.
So when I was at Atlantic, I taught at Atlantic for 5 years prior to the transition. And like Dawn said, there was lots of controversy. It had kind of been not necessarily in the works, but there had always been talk about it over the last maybe 3 years. But I taught at Atlantic, and then it came into fruition basically. And there was a lot of concern over, not saying that it was a negative for our 6th through 8th grade going to Smyrna, but I think there was a lot of concern with, well, what's going to happen next to our elementary schools? I think there's a lot of concern. How are we going to keep these schools open, our community schools open, with the population and our numbers in the school kind of dwindling at that? Because I think overall, a lot of parents and even the students have really enjoyed having more opportunities being at a larger middle school, with the arts and music and sports. So they have really enjoyed that aspect. And I think now everybody's kind of on the same page, like, okay, there was benefit. This does work for our kids. This is beneficial for our community.
Yes, I think so. I mean, change is hard. We know that.
Yes.
And we always we worry.
It's worry of the unknown.
Exactly.
And I know that what she speaks of the couple of years prior, I know I was part-time in the library for a couple of those years. And they did a lot of facility studies, of where does this fit?
Where's it going?
Where can it be somewhere on its own of one of these three? And so that was, I think, led to a lot of, the uncertainty, but okay, now it's going to be at Smyrna, so that finality was like, oh, okay. So then we're going to be the elementary schools. And I know for part of us, they gained an entity of now they're only an elementary school. They can focus on that. And I know that we saw that on our side. Our Smyrna Elementary was now a secondary school per se, and yet there are things that are shared. There are things, the library, it's still all one campus, one cafeteria. So making those adjustments, it was everybody was involved in the change. It
and
really was.
and that's why it's been successful. I think it's because everybody has been involved. Because it definitely would have not been the case if they'd have kept resisting folks. But again, I think the resistance came from a good place, a place of love and concern for the kids. And as Charlotte mentioned, when you think about losing students from Harker's Island and Atlantic schools where numbers are already low, that's scary. So our school is going to stay open, that kind of thing. So that's definitely well placed. I'm worried, but now we see everything's good. All right, Sarah, you're not off the hook. As a student, and you hear that this is happening because you were then, I guess, in 6th and 7th grade. So this is definitely, it's going to impact you. What did you think? I mean, about this happening and folks coming from other schools to yours and such?
Well, I remember hearing about it. I think I was in 7th grade. I always heard about things that were going on a little earlier just because my mom was working in school.
Right.
So I heard about it a little bit earlier than probably some of my classmates. But I was a little bit nervous and just skeptical about it for a bit because, Smyrna, the Blue Devils, was all I had known for 8 years. So I was like kind of intrigued to see how the teachers coming in would be different, how my classmates, which I was excited because I had played softball with a few of the Harkers Island girls and Atlantic girls, so being able to actually go to school with them was actually very cool. But more of just like the structural changes of everything, how we would go to class. We would have team teachers, so we weren't changing every, class period. We'd go from 4 teachers down to 2 teachers. So that was, I felt like, a little bit weird. It was just weird to me because I had done that.
And that's a great segue because that goes to how Smyrna was already structured. They very much already rotated teachers. Yeah, they all were in the hallway at the same time. So for them, they had a science teacher, a social studies teacher. The hard part was the teachers were having 3 grade levels to prep for, but they concentrated on a subject. So they changed classes.
It was very much more like high school.
And
so it kind of felt like we were going back in time where I felt like the 4 classes, it was like you were changing like you're in high school. We're kind of gearing up to go to high school. So then I was like, well, why are we going to 2 teachers? But it actually made a lot more sense and it was easier to get to know your teacher, have a good rapport with them, and all of you had the same class of people.
The initial idea was to have a 6th grade team. You stayed with those 2 teachers, 7th grade team, those 2 teachers, 8th grade team.
I ended up really liking it a lot.
Yes. And Ms. Charlotte, you would have a better angle, I feel like, from Atlantic's kids and how you all worked your middle school 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes.
Yes, so just like they were saying, in terms of how Atlantic's school was organized, essentially, I was the science teacher for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but I also had the prep of 6th grade social studies as well. And they would change classes, and we had a math teacher and we had a language arts teacher and social studies teacher. So it worked the same way as how Smyrna had their structure. And I guess when the transition happened, having the teen teachers, it was supposed to mirror that of the other schools, middle schools in Carteret County, because they have teams of 2 or 4, depending on the population of the school. So coming from being at Atlantic to Smyrna, I currently teach 2 subjects, and this year I'll be teaching 3. I have Earth and Environmental, 6th grade science, and 8th grade science as well. So prep-wise, I'm still kind of in the same frame, but it's still science.
But there for a while, I think the building of, you also had a diverse, like you weren't with Miss Johnson for 3 years. You know, in the initial stages,
Right.
we had a team of 2 for 6th grade, and they moved to a different team for 7th grade. So your total number of teachers by the time you got through 8th grade, you had a fresh start every year with a team.
Okay.
And so it wasn't the same teachers rotating multiple times throughout your 3 years that
Okay.
you had for multiple subjects and multiple years. So I think that was a benefit to students and teachers overall for the and so the same as today. I mean, they sometimes don't have that teacher but 1 year, for certain subjects.
Right, and that's got to be a benefit because I know when I graduated a long time ago, but I left Harkers Island and we had 16 in our 8th grade class, and then with East Carteret, it was a big adjustment. It was a huge adjustment because we didn't know the majority of the kids that we were now in the school with. So did you? I mean, was that a huge transition? Like, what did you think that it helped having the middle school?
Well, for me, since I went to Smyrna, it probably wouldn't have been that big of a deal if it was still the same. They kept the middle schools separated. It wouldn't have been a big deal for me. But I think for the kids who went to Atlantic and Harkers Island, they knew people that went to Smyrna and Beaufort, but they didn't interact with them on a day-to-day basis, so they didn't really know them, I guess. So when they would go to East Carter, I would imagine that would be a pretty big stressor. But since they combined all of them, I think it was good for us too to get to know them, because then we all are friends with them when we get to East Carter, and then we just have to mess with Beaufort,
Right.
which is
And I
fairly
recall
easy.
the travel time. You had the kids that kind of knew them were the ones that were active in sports,
Yeah.
Right.
and they were all having to transport in the afternoon to get to Smyrna to practice, or to Eastern
Yeah.
Park to practice.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that was very time consuming, and so only those kids were the ones that potentially interacted. So
yeah.
I think those that might be more introverted, they were this was a way to get them with a larger group before they transitioned to high school. So I think that's definitely been a benefit.
Well, I would like to hear from y'all, and maybe Charlotte, you can start this. Now that you've been in it a while and you can see the fruits of your labor, I mean, like you've graduated now from high school and all. So what do you think, looking back? Like, do you look at yourselves and you think, wow, I mean, this is great? And why? Does that make sense? Like, what are some of the biggest positives from this?
All right, greatest positive, Charlotte, I'll let you go.
Greatest positives, just being able to have a student population that is big enough to allow for more organizations and for them to experience, clubs and, like I said, sports and everything else that we couldn't offer at the smaller schools, at the elementary schools. And I think that that's wonderful for our students that we're able to provide those opportunities. Not to say that we couldn't have done that at the elementary, but we were just spread so thin. It was just hard to do. And I know from, with Dawn starting at the transition currently and, or prior, and then present day, just even the conversations within the community at sporting events. Well, who's Down East Middle? When we first started out, where are they located? What is that? We were the new school. Nobody really knew who we were. So we had to build this kind of reputation and our name. And, I'm proud to be a part of that. And I think our students are proud to be known as the Lookouts, and that they're part of the Down East community.
Yes.
I 100% agree that I was so funny being on gate duty on days, and they would drive up from folks across the river. It's like, so where is Down East Middle? Like we had, overnight in a matter of months, built a brand new school.
Yeah.
And we were like, it's right here. It's this gym that you've been coming to. And it was, oh, okay. And so, but as far as over the years, it's that, like she said, that cohesiveness that we are down east. And it's,
And
you
I
know,
love that.
and it's not Atlantic, they're middle schoolers, but they're having to drive to Smyrna, and they're the Blue Devils, it's like, how do you have this team? And so I think they are down east. And so having that identity, I think, helps them going forward, that you were part of this in the middle. You went to an elementary school. This is, who you are going towards East Carteret. So, and it's even interesting now that we have some blended like wrestling that we work with Beaufort. So
Oh, really? I
it's
didn't
like
know
been an
that.
interesting transition
I
for a
think they've
couple of
done
sports
football in the
that
past. Combined football team.
yeah. But as far as her talking about, opening up some other opportunities, that was one of the big pushes, was the STEM classes, the CTE classes that they would be offered. My Battle of the Books team, for 2 years, I was split, and I did Battle of the Books at 2 schools. But then when I finally got to Smyrna and we became down east, that was our team. And so it was those kids that didn't have that opportunity. If they didn't have a librarian that we could have, we had enough people interested. And that waxes and wanes with kids' interest in what their ability to manage, because now they want to do band, you want to do the sports, because it's all right there after school. You don't have to travel. Nobody has, the transportation issue's not a problem. And so,
which is huge.
Yeah.
When
And
we're
I
talking
had the
about
first
our area.
Yeah,
It's
I
huge.
had the first Battle of the Books team last year that I had in about 4 years. And it just is always offered, but it's one of those things, just depends on what the kids' interests are. And so, but it's offered. And so we had a great year. And those STEM opportunities, field trips, I know that was one of the big things. And one of your questions that talked about things that the blending of that staff. And I think we did a great job with that. There were losses, there were tears. We're not going to joke and say that it wasn't sad.
Right.
But I think the blending of what people did at other schools, Lindsay Foddery's not here, but she and Mr. Waz, they took those 8th graders and just went like they had always had them. And some of those things still continue. And I think, that's one of the greatest appreciations, I'd say, for any of those kids, that Atlantic did their own DC trip, and they had parents that took them. It was a very much more intimate affair.
Right.
And so I think there's certain things that are pluses to that, and then certain things that, it's great when you get to travel with a whole busload of people,
Oh, for sure.
So that's, but I think those are some of the biggest perks of the staff, what staff brought to our school.
One thing that go ahead, Charlotte.
I'm sorry. Well, in talking about the 8th grade trip to DC, it's, even though we have transitioned from the feeder schools to Down East Middle is still a small school. Mm-hmm. So we're able to do trips. We're the only middle school that has the opportunity to take our kids to Washington, D.C. Because of our numbers. Right. It's hard to offer those things to the other schools just because of the student population being higher. And that's one thing that's kind of unique about us, is that we're just small enough and just big enough to get away with some things that you can't at other schools.
Yeah, I was friends with a bunch of people. I played volleyball with some girls from Moorhead, and we'd be talking like, oh yeah, we're going to DC next week, or we're going here, and we're going there. She's like, that's so cool that y'all get to do field trips. Like, I'm like, yeah, like the whole 8th grade's going, where like their 8th grade was like probably 200 people.
Wow, just in that one grade.
Yeah, just in their one grade. And it was also cool because I got to know, I probably could tell you everybody, not now that I graduated name, but when I graduated 8th grade, I could probably tell you everybody's name.
Right, which
so
is
I
awesome.
thought that was cool.
That is cool. That is.
So I got to know everybody, and then when we went to East Carteret, we all knew each other. So it wasn't like you got there and didn't know anybody on your first
And not
day.
only did you know each other, you were classmates. I mean, like, it was, you were a group. And that's one point I want to close on, I think would be a good place to do. By there being, I taught in Pamlico County for a while. And of course, you know that they have one high school, one primary. That was an eye-opening experience for me because the whole area was supporting this one group. So do you all feel that at Down East Middle? Like, do all the communities are supporting, kind of touch on that a little bit, like how, because I know for me that was wonderful.
I think sports kind of feeds that a little bit, just like
I
in
think
my
a
experience.
lot.
Yeah, yes.
I coach Down East girls softball. So all of those girls from Atlantic, Marshallburg, wherever, all over Down East, even some from other places in the county, they all played Down East softball, but it's not like Atlantic Softball League or Harkers Island or whatever. They're all Down East. So then when they get to Down East Middle School, it's like nothing's different. So I think that's also really special, where everybody's rooting for Down East and it's not one school specifically.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And I think band, I think about that. I was trying to, compartmentalize and think about the band's perspective. And I remember our band directors having to travel.
Oh, yes.
And you've got like 3 instruments. You're just like, how do you make that work? And I was like, how masterful for them to try, and now they're all, that was probably one of the greatest, I'm thinking, wow, that, subject, they can all hear each other in that same classroom.
Right,
and not just when you have an after school practice.
When you meet after school. And,
I mean,
remember in
little
6th and
things, but it's
7th
big things.
That's true.
In
I hadn't
6th
thought
and
about
7th
that.
grade, we would like have an after school practice before a concert, and that would be like the first time I would meet some of these kids. And I'm like, oh, like, what's your name? Like, I don't know you. I've never played with you before because we didn't go to the same school.
Right.
But then,
That's
like,
true.
in 8th grade, we all played with each other every single day. So I think that also made it, our band at least, a lot better.
Yeah, for sure it did.
Yeah, it was one of those things, looking back and trying to think of things you asked at the beginning of in the inception, our county was very supportive in trying to make it a success. One of the things that they did for us was send us to a middle school conference, and I think yes, there were things that we already knew, we already did, even though we might have looked different, but I think it built a team when you go and travel and meet together, and it just had that bond of that initial, it's changed a little bit, come and go of staff members over those years, but I think they really, their goal was to make it a success.
Yeah,
So,
it helped build that foundation.
it did.
And it sounds like it is a great success.
It is.
Any parting words, anything that you'd like to say before we close out?
Anything, Charlotte, in case my phone?
Not anything I can think of, but thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective.
I appreciate you being here.
I think
Absolutely.
we think it's a success. One of the things I look at her, but I think, if we had an Atlantic or a high school kid, to answer how did they feel going to high school, to maybe wonder, do you feel it helped you? I hope that it did. I feel like surely it had to. From walking out of an Atlantic school of people you had been with from kindergarten all the way up, I'm hoping, I feel it was a success. So
I for sure it had to be.
Yeah.
It had to be.
Yeah. I think as a student, even if since I did go to Smyrna, but just like thinking about going to Atlantic and then just going straight from Atlantic to high school, I would have been so nervous. So I can imagine just how much it helped to make the middle schools.
Making those
Same.
connections.
Yeah, just stronger
With-
to, like one of
So I
our
feel like-
mottos this year is better together. And it kind of
and
comes
it-
back to that
yeah.
whole concept.
Yeah, and
I think
for
we're better
sure.
together.
For sure. My goodness. Well, thank you all
Thank
for being here.
Thank you.
I know you're busy, and I'm appreciate you carving out this time for us. And we appreciate all that you're doing to continue to serve our Down East students. And we look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Thanks, Stacey.
All
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
What an interesting conversation about the start of our Down East Middle School. Although I am grateful for the K through 8th education I received at Harkers Island Elementary School when I was growing up, I can definitely see the benefits of bringing our community's middle schoolers together before entering high school. I asked my cousin Shelby Morris from Atlantic what she thought of going to Down East Middle School, and she shared, quote, I grew up with my fellow Atlantic classmates all my life. The transfer to Down East Middle School was significant for all of us. There were a lot more kids than we were used to seeing every day. I believe we all adapted well and were able to find our way and find friendships we kept throughout high school." End quote. I love this for our students. Join me next week for a discussion with Mr. Jimmy Amspacker about his education at Atlantic High School. It was an entertaining visit filled with gratitude and good memories. Until then, stay safe and be kind.